Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Hope Church. It is so good to have you here today. My name is Jason. I'm the lead pastor on staff. And if you came to church with someone today, or if you're at home and you're watching with someone today, I want to let you know that today would have been a great day to come to church alone. Because today I'm going to show you something about your level of maturity in your relationships. In fact, I'm going to give you a test later on in the message, and once you take this test, we will all know with crystal clarity how mature or immature you are when it comes to reassembling your broken relationship. So when we get to that part of the message, just so you know, eyes up here, no elbows, no clearing your throat in someone else's general direction, because this is for you, because my desire as a pastor is that you become more mature in handling your relationships, specifically in your broken relationships, because that's what this series is about. Reassembling relationships, a beginner's guide to reassembling our broken and strained relationships, because what we all have in common is we all have strained and broken relationships, and we're generally better at assembling them than we are at reassembling them after they've become broken. Now, today's topic is incredibly important, but it won't make a ton of sense unless you understand everything that came before this in this series. This is part 5 of the series, so I'm going to do a lightning quick recap of everything we've covered so far, and then we'll jump into today's new content. So when it comes to reassembling broken relationships or strained relationships, the first step to take in them is this: adopt the mindset of Jesus. You see, you have done things that have strained and broken your relationship with God. Now, in the church, we call that sin. I don't know what you call it if you're not a Christian, but when you lie awake at night, when you ruminate on your failures or your past, you know you have not always handled things the right way. Well, the mindset of Jesus was reconciliation. I know you've broken the relationship. I know you've strained the relationship, but I want to be reconciled with you. That's his mindset. Now, forgiveness was not the goal. Forgiveness was the means to the end. And the end is to live in a whole relationship with our Creator. Forgiveness was necessary for that. That's why he gave his life on the cross. But he said eternal life is knowing him, living in relationship with him. And that starts right now. It extends into eternal life. So the question, as soon as you notice you have a strained or broken relationship, the question to think about is this: do you want to get back with or get back at? What's your true objective here? Because if you're thinking, well, I'm going to get back at him, I'm going to get back at her, you do not have the mindset of Jesus. So right out of the gate, is your desire to get even, to get revenge, to be justified, or is it wholeness of relationship? Then we learned step 2 in part 2 of this series. Give thanks for how much God has forgiven you. Before you focus on how you've been treated unfairly, or how they're so annoying, or how they're in the wrong, or they shouldn't have reacted that way, you just take some time with you and God to remember, how much debt has your King forgiven you? And we don't do that to beat ourselves up or to say, I guess I'm shameful or I'm worthless. No, it's with gratitude. We're giving thanks like, wow, I had a mountain of debt of sin to God, and he just canceled the whole thing. He should have canceled me, but he didn't, because he loves me, because of who he is. He canceled my debt. And you just stay there until that begins to warm your heart in appreciation for God. And then finally we get to step 3. And step 3 is to forgive. Again, forgiveness is not an announcement to the person. This is just business you're doing with God in your own heart, and you choose to forgive. The 3 steps there were, number 1, acknowledge the debt. Forgiving is not ignoring. Forgiving is not dismissing. Forgiving is not ignoring justice. It is acknowledging this is the inequity in our relationship. This is what was owed me that wasn't given to me. This is why things are not whole. This is the hurt that was done to me. It begins by acknowledging that there is a real debt here. Now, by the way, here's a little pro tip for you guys. As you acknowledge that debt, do it by having a little bit of empathy for your fellow humanity. Okay, you've messed up before yourself. You've had rough days before yourself and didn't handle things the way you should have. Wonder what might have led them to behave this way. Okay, just a little bit of empathy for our common humanity will go a long ways as you're acknowledging the debt in the relationship that you're owed. And after you acknowledge the debt, step 2 is to choose to cancel the debt, not the person. Forgiveness is not a feeling. Forgiveness is a choice. It's a decision. I decide that you don't owe me for that anymore. And then, if necessary, remind yourself that you have canceled the debt, because the feeling of forgiveness can take a long time to catch up to the decision of forgiveness. And it's when you remind yourself, no, I chose to cancel that debt, just like God chose to cancel my debt, then eventually the feeling of forgiveness can catch up, and that's when you realize you are totally free from your past and free from the pain. So that's step 3. Now, step 4 is determine if this relationship should be reconciled. This is what we talked about last week, that not every relationship should be reconciled because some people are not trustworthy. Some people in our world are what the book of Proverbs call fools. I would never call them that. The Bible called them that. And if you associate with people who are fools, you will suffer consequences. It's inevitable. There are some people where you have to have some kind of working relationship with them, but there's boundaries. And with those boundaries, here's how much access you have to my life, but that's where it ends. So how do you decide if you should reconcile a relationship and where that line is drawn? Well, there's 3 things to look at we talked about. Number 1, evaluate their ability. Do they have the competence to be a dependable, trustworthy person? Maybe they don't. Number 2, evaluate their character. Is this, generally speaking, a person of good intentions? Okay? None of us are perfect, but is this basically a well-intentioned person? And 3, this is key, evaluate not their words, evaluate their track record. Are they showing a track record of behaving in a trustworthy way? So in those relationships where you're stuck with someone because maybe they're a coworker or maybe they're a family member, maybe they don't pass all 3 tests yet. That's okay. You just maintain the clear boundaries of, well, here's what needs to happen before trust is established. And in the meantime, this is where I'm setting the boundary because we just have to figure out how to get along. Today, finally, 5 weeks into this series, we come to the place where we learn, okay, how do I approach the other person? When I have a strained or broken relationship, how do we begin to mend the relationship? Now, every time there's a strained or broken relationship, the reason why things aren't right is because someone is in the wrong, right? Every time things aren't right, it's because someone is wrong. And because someone is wrong, maybe they spoke wrong, they behaved wrong, they just reacted in the wrong way, they reacted or responded or behaved in a way that hurt the relationship, somebody handled something in the wrong way, and that's why things aren't right. Now, every time somebody handles something in the wrong way, that creates an opportunity in the relationship to blame someone, to find out who did the wrong thing and how wrong they were and how they were more wrong than I was wrong, and we call that blame. Blame is assigning responsibility for fault or wrongdoing. See, we wouldn't have a problem if he would just put the toilet seat down. This is his fault. Okay? We wouldn't have a problem if she would just stay on budget. My coworkers would be great if they would just try chewing gum after drinking coffee and then talking in my face, or if they would stop talking incessantly about their pets, or if they could learn the difference in email between reply and reply all. If they would just stop getting it wrong, then we would be great coworkers. If someone else would empty the dishwasher around here, but they never do, right? So something's wrong, and when we blame people, we're assigning the fault to someone. You did the wrong. It's your wrongdoing. It's your inaction or your action that led to the broken or strained relationship. Now, I know this doesn't happen among you. I'm just talking about other people today. Now, some of us have learned a very unhealthy habit when relationships become strained. Because some of us default in strained relationships to blaming others. Okay, you know people like this. Some of us are people like this, where as soon as something goes wrong, we're very quick to blame. We see this all over the place in our culture today. This defines the modern American political system. Every time something goes wrong, it's the Democrats' fault, it's the Republicans' fault. Well, this trickles down into our lives. Some people, whenever there's a broken relationship, default to blame. It's your fault, it's his fault, it's their fault, but it's not my fault. Now, why do people default to blame? Honestly, eyes up here. It's a sign of immaturity. And here's why. Number one, blame is a defense mechanism. It's because someone's ego is so fragile, they can't admit their wrongdoing. Someone's psyche is so fragile that they have a hard time taking ownership of their contribution to the problem. And so since I don't want to have to deal with that reality, I just put up the wall of blame and point all the fingers in your direction, because that way I can preserve my fragile sense of ego. Or blame is a weapon. It's because I want the relationship to be broken. And if I want the relationship to be broken, I can just blame you, and it's your fault, and you're wrong, and pow, 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 right? And it's because I don't like you or whatever it is, I can just use blame as a weapon, and that way I don't have to take responsibility. But either way, no matter how you slice it, blame is something we do because blame is easier than accepting responsibility. Because if you're responsible for something, now you have to clean up your mess. If you're responsible for something, now you have to acknowledge that you failed, or you weren't at your best that day, or you have to own it. Blame is easier than accepting responsibility. Here's the problem, however, once blame enters the relationship dynamic. Blame is incompatible with reconciliation. Okay? Can you think of any relationship strain you have ever had where the response was, well, let's blame each other, and oh, we're great now. We assigned all the wrongdoing. Our relationship is fantastic. No, and here's the reason why. Blaming is the opposite of accepting responsibility, and your irresponsibility eventually becomes someone else's responsibility. Now you know how this works in other areas of life. If at my home, if I never pick up my dirty socks, if I never put away my dirty dishes, I'm not taking responsibility for myself. Whose responsibility does that become? Yeah, my wife, who I'm treating like my mom, like I'm 10 years old. That's whose responsibility it becomes. Your irresponsibility eventually becomes someone else's responsibility. Have you ever had that coworker who's always cutting corners and taking the path of least resistance? Their irresponsibility, whose responsibility does that become? It becomes yours eventually. That's the nature of irresponsibility. And in a strained or broken relationship, when our response is to say, well, it's all your fault, that means we're not taking responsibility for what is our fault. And our irresponsibility becomes someone else's responsibility. The cycle goes on and on and on. And then they say, well, you're not owning your part, and that's your fault. And then the blame just goes back and forth until the relationship devolves. Well, the good news is there's a way to end the blame game. There's a way for all of us to become experts at reassembling our broken and strained relationships by learning how to end the blame game. Now, to get started, we're going to go back and look at a verse we've looked at a couple times in this series already, but it's just so wise when it comes to understanding how to mend our broken relationships. Because in this verse, there's a don't, there's a do, and there's a maybe, okay? Romans chapter 12. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. So there's the don't. If you've been wronged, granted, it's going to happen in this world, let's not respond with evil in kind. That's just going to create a downward spiral. Instead, be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. So there's the don't, there's the do, what is right in everyone's eyes, and here's the maybe. If it is possible, We looked at this last week, so it's not always possible or wise. As far as it depends on you. That's what we're going to focus on today. As far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Even if you were wronged, there is a peace that depends on you. And if you were in the wrong, there is a peace that depends on you. And it is something that you have to take responsibility for. Now, we say in our culture that time heals all wounds. It's not true. Some of you have had an ailment for years and years and years. Time does not heal that. In the same way, some of you have had a broken relationship for years and years and years. Time has not healed that. Responsibility is what heals our wounds, relationally speaking. So today, to help us with that idea, we're going to turn to something Jesus taught in his most famous sermon ever. We call it the Sermon on the Mount. And in this sermon, he talks about how to respond to a strained or broken relationship, and he shows us where it begins. Yes, after you remember, I'm a citizen of God's kingdom, I'm a child of God, I'm forgiven, I'm going to practice unconditional forgiveness, but when it comes to reconciliation, how do I approach the other person with whom I have a strained or broken relationship? That's what Jesus is going to teach us today in Matthew chapter 7. He said, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged." Now, a lot of people like to stop reading there. Okay, quick, close the Bible before we hear something we don't like, because they think Jesus taught, oh, that means you can't judge me. Jesus said, don't judge, you can't judge me. Let him finish the sermon. For, he said, in the same way you judge others. In the same way you judge others. Or you could write here, in the same way you blame others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Now, he's saying two things here. The first thing is this. If you decide you are going to respond to all offenses with lots of blame, God's in heaven saying, really, that's the standard we want to use in your life? That's the standard by which you want me to judge you? So you're a citizen of God's kingdom, and this is the second thing he's teaching. You're a citizen of God's kingdom who's been forgiven a mountain of debt by the king. Do you really not want to live in the values of this kingdom? Which kingdom do you want to live in? Do you want to live in the kingdom of heaven where sins are forgiven, where debt is canceled, where people are restored, where relationships are reconciled? Or do you want to live in the kingdom of the evil one, where relationships are broken and lives are filled with loneliness and isolation and anxiety because of it? Which standard do we want to use? Kingdom of heaven or kingdom of the evil one? Which team are you on? He's saying we've forgotten that we are the people as Christians, for those of us who are followers of Jesus, who have been forgiven by Jesus. That's what it means to be a Christian. I'm not better than anyone else. I'm better off than I used to be because Jesus forgave me. Now I'm a citizen of heaven. I'm going to advance the values of this kingdom. Now, that's kind of the umbrella idea. Now he's going to get real specific on what this looks like in our lives. He says, why? Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? So he says, hey, in relationships, why are you focusing on the little thing that's their problem when you're ignoring the big thing that's your problem? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? So he just kind of illustrates this in a silly way, like you got a piece of lumber sticking out of your eye. Oh, you got something in your eye there. He's making it ridiculous, but then he drops the hammer. You hypocrite. You know what a hypocrite is? It's someone who expects behavior out of someone else that they're not willing to adhere to themselves. I want you to deal with your mess, but I'm not willing to deal with my mess. I want you to take responsibility for your responsibilities, but I'm not willing to take responsibility for my responsibilities. Jesus says, I wouldn't say this, Jesus says, you hypocrite. First, notice the sequence. First, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Now, does Jesus say your brother, in this illustration, does he say the other person is guilt-free in this scenario? Does he say they didn't do anything wrong, it's all your fault? No. He's saying, yeah, they got a speck in their eye. They are partly to blame. Part of this is their responsibility. That is true. But first, take care of your own responsibility. First, deal with your own problems. First, own your own slice of the pie. Only then, after you take responsibility for your actions, for your inactions, for your words, for your response, only then will you be able to help them with their part of the broken relationship. So here's the big idea we get from Jesus today. Reassembly begins with me, not with them. Reassembly begins with me, not with them. Reassembly begins with self-awareness, not self-excusing. It begins by acknowledging, I am in part responsible for this. Or to ask the question a different way, what's your slice of the pie? Now, when I was a young pastor, I learned pretty quickly that I am not very skilled at counseling. But people would always ask me, hey, Jason, can I meet with you? I need to talk about something. And they thought I could help because they listened to me like, well, you're a pretty good speaker. You're a pretty good preacher. Maybe you can help me with my problem. What I learned is there's a difference between preaching and counseling, because in preaching, it's great. I get a microphone and I just get to talk. But in counseling, I'm supposed to listen and stuff. I don't know. Because when people would sit down and they'd start telling the story, I'm just telling you my inadequacies here, they'd start telling me their story, I'd be like 30 seconds into listening, and I'd be like, okay, you don't see where this is going, do you? You really don't, do you? Let me interrupt. Here's what's going to happen next, this and this and this, and don't you see how this is connected to this? And if you would knock that off and start doing that, everything will be fine. Hey, this was a great 3 minutes. Thanks for coming in. Anyway, I've read a couple books to try and get a little bit better. Still working on the listening part. But what I would do is, as I noticed a trend that would happen where someone would come in and say, hey, Jason, I need to come and talk to you. And usually it was someone by themselves. It was either a spouse or it was a parent of an adult child. And they would come in and they would say, our relationship is a mess. And the reason why it's a mess is because he always, she never, if they just would, and they just go on and on and on about how terrible their spouse is, how terrible their kids are, whatever it is, just piling on and on and on, and they're the martyr, and nobody cares about them or respects them. And I'm like, okay, I got it. They're the devil. You married the devil. Got it. Listen, they're not here, okay? I can't fix them. I know you want me to fix them. I can't fix them even if they were here, but they're not even here to talk to. But look who is here. It's you. So let's try this out. Now take out a sheet of paper, now draw a big circle on it, and I'd say, imagine that this is a big pie. Now this pie is your relationship mess. This is your problem pie, okay? Let's call it your problem pie. Now, in the problem pie, each of you bear some responsibility. Now, based on how you're talking, it sounds like it's about 95% their fault, okay? Fine, granted. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to draw for me on my problem pie how big the slice is that's your responsibility. Okay, you just show me how big your slice of the pie is. Now, doesn't that sound like a really good idea? They never did it. They would just launch right back into their problem, and he always, and she never, and I couldn't get any traction with this. And I thought, that happened to me twice, and I thought, third time's the charm. It's going to work for the whole church. So the question is, when it comes to your broken and strained relationships, there is a slice of pie that belongs to you. It might be 50%. It might be 25%. It might be 90%. I don't know. But listen, reassembly begins when you own your slice of the pie. Now, instantly, some of you are thinking, well, Jason, you don't know them. If I own my slice, they're just going to be let off the hook. If I own my slice, they're going to think they're not to blame. That's why I tell them they're to blame, because I don't want them to forget, because they seem to not want to take responsibility. If I own my slice of the pie, they won't take responsibility. How's that working out for you so far? Oh, and Jesus said, First, take the plank out of your own eye. First, own your slice of the problem pie. Then you will be able to help them take the speck out of their eye. Here's what I have seen as a counselor. When a couple comes in and one of them leads with owning their slice of the pie and sincerely apologizing for it, that's when the tears start to flow. That's when the other person begins to open up and confess, and here's what I've done wrong too, and I'm so sorry, and of course I forgive you. But in your strained and your broken relationships, do you know who's going to go first in owning their slice of the pie? Eyes up here. The one who's more mature. Now, here's where we get the maturity to do this. You get the maturity by remembering who you are. A citizen of the kingdom of heaven, forgiven by the King. See, when you own your slice of the pie, sometimes they're not going to be happy about that right away. They might not accept you right away, but God does. They might not forgive you right away, but God has. Find your security and confidence in being a citizen of the kingdom of heaven, and then you can first take the plank out of your own eye, regardless of whether or not they reciprocate, regardless of whether or not they move forward in the relationship. You can have peace about the relationship, even if there's not peace in the relationship, because you honored your Father in heaven. So, here's your homework this week. It's to own your slice. And here's how we're going to do that. First, spend time in prayer. God, show me where I am at fault. I already know how they're at fault, God. I probably don't need your help with that, but take some time in prayer. God, I need some real awareness here, because reassembly begins with self-awareness, not self-deception. God, I need awareness, and I can deceive myself. Show me where I am at fault. And once you recognize however big your slice of the pie is, then own your slice of the pie. Go to the person and say, hey, listen, I just need to tell you something. Here's where I let you down. Here's what I shouldn't have said. Here's how I should have been there. You just own it, whatever it is. Again, they might not react positively in the moment. That's okay. You have the love and affirmation of your Father in heaven who loves you. And then, after that, offer a sincere apology. Here's what a sincere apology sounds like. I'm sorry, please forgive me. I'm sorry, I didn't. Will you forgive me. That's the first step of reassembling a broken relationship. And that is powerful to clear out the things that are keeping your relationship broken or strained. Now, if it's a professional environment like work, you may or may not use the forgiveness word because that's kind of a very personal or intimate word. I'm sorry, I blank. How can I regain your trust? How can I make it up to you? And listen, because now you are showing that you are a person who is trustworthy. Now you are showing that you are a person who has self-awareness. And you are a person in your relationships who has maturity. And you are ending the blame game. And you are living like a citizen in God's kingdom. So, what's your slice of the pie? With your strained relationships that are broken right now, with your adult kids, with your teenage kids, with your parents, with that one teacher who never cuts you a break, with the boss who just looks right past your work, with your partner. And maybe it's not one big thing, it's just all these little things as you're both busy in life and you're both tired and you're both exhausted. Listen, in whatever relationship is strained or broken, what's your slice of the pie? Will you pray, God, show me where I am at fault? Let's pray. Father in heaven, this is so much easier to talk about on a stage than it is for any of us to live out and to put into practice in our real relationships because there's so much emotion involved. But Father, if we're honest, there's also a lot of pride and ego involved. And we apologize to you that we live like we're the king instead of you. When we turn to Jesus, we confess to Jesus our pride, our blaming of others. And we trust in your unfailing love. I ask that all of us, by your power, Spirit, will have just such an awareness in our inner lives of your love, of your compassion, of your kindness, and of your presence, that we will have the confidence in you to be people of humility. People who don't need to prop up fragile egos anymore because we know we are children of God. People who can have the mindset of Jesus and seek reconciliation. Jesus, give us the courage to live out your word this week in our relationships. We pray all of this in your name, Jesus. Amen.